Season's greetings, everyone, and welcome to this Christmas Eve special TooFatLardies Advent window, the last one for 2022. And behind this window, the question for me is, what's my favourite activity while painting Wargames figures? One of the things I find really difficult when painting Wargames figures is sort of doing two things at once, if that's possible to explain. So I generally use a very large magnifier when I'm painting figures. I didn't always do that, but about 10 years ago I started using one. I found it really difficult to move away from that. I think it's just eyesight is just generally, gradually just slipping away. I sound like an optician, don't I? As I get older, as regards the focus I'm able to give to the small details on figures. And I found a magnifier really helped. And that does kind of cut down the scope of vision outside the magnifier and makes it difficult, and not impossible, but slightly difficult to look at other things at the same time. So although I do sometimes watch television, and in particular films and streaming TV programs while I'm painting, I generally tend to listen to audiobooks or to podcasts, and that's generally the activity that I undertake when I'm painting Wargames figures. For me, it's a time to relax, and listening to a good audiobook or a fine podcast, that really helps me pass the time and get into a very good flow state, as I think people have called it in the past. I've got a few favourite authors that I like to listen to. Looking back at one of my notebooks over the last few years, I can see that I've gone through almost the entire catalogue of Ian M. Banks's science fiction books. He unfortunately passed away in 2013, but he was a really excellent writer, and I really enjoy Ian Banks's books. I say Ian M. Banks because he also published fiction, but not science fiction, under Ian Banks. I tend to prefer the science fiction, although the fiction is great. So some of my favourites there are The Player of Games and Against a Dark Background, which I think is just brilliant. But I think I've been through most of his books by now. I've also really enjoyed, a slight guilty pleasure perhaps, the William King books, which were recorded on Audible as part of the Warhammer series. So Skaven Slayer, Demon Slayer, Beast Slayer, and so on. They're great fun, and they're the tales of Gotrek and Felix as they trample through the old world. I mean, it's really indulgent pleasures, but they're really nice to listen to, I find, when I'm painting. Also really like Dan Abnett's series for Eisenhorn and Ravener, and also the parts of the Beckwin trilogy which have been written and published so far. I really enjoy those. I think, again, they're science fiction, but the way that Dan creates a whole world and these troops of inquisitors going around the 40k universe, I think that they're really exciting, and they're very well narrated as well. Other books tend to come and go, and there's a wide variety I've listened to. Good friend of the podcast, Steve Bond, hi Steve, recommended to me the David Aronovich books on Rivers of London. They've been fantastic. I've really enjoyed those as I've been painting. And also a really big shout out to a guy called Laird Barron, who writes books which are set in the Cthulhu mythos. I came across those kind of by happenstance, but I've really been enjoying his writing. It's unusual and slightly unsettling, like all the best tales of the Cthulhu mythos should really be. As regards podcasts, I kind of listen to, I think, all the gaming podcasts. I really, really enjoy the wargaming ones that I can find, but also increasingly some of the podcasts about game design and also role-playing. And a huge shout out at this point to the Grognard Files, which is just really one of the prince of podcasts out there, with Dirk the Dice and Blythe. That's always really enjoyable and brought back many happy memories. Now, saying that I don't often watch films and don't really watch too many TV programmes, it's not entirely true, because I find what's difficult is concentrating on very sort of action-packed film and TV programmes, because when I'm painting it's difficult to watch the screen and also watch where my paintbrush is going, let's be completely honest. But I think what I have managed to do is watch on either there's a TV and DVD on the painting table or indeed streaming on my phone, is things that I actually know what's happening. So watching things for a second time around isn't too difficult when I'm painting. So yes, I have obviously got the DVD of A Bridge Too Far and other great classics like Waterloo and Zulu, The Men Who Would Be King, all of those classic sort of films. I crank those out occasionally, and I think you can quite happily watch those along with film trilogies like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit while I'm painting, because I kind of watched those so many times that I know what's happening, and I can just sort of look up at the absolute favourite bits from those films and follow along the action and then continue painting. And in the same way, another one of my big pleasures is film noirs, so watching things like Double Indemnity, The Maltese Falcon, Touch of Evil. Quite happy to watch those because I've seen those with Sunset Boulevard and other films of that type, literally, possibly dozens of times, certainly with Sunset Boulevard. I think I know that one off by heart. And that's a really enjoyable thing, that you're, again, in the flow state, enjoying something, and you don't really need to spend too much time concentrating on it. Unfortunately, one of the things that I do otherwise really enjoy, which is foreign films and world cinema, that's not always easy to access when I'm painting, because the subtitles in English of the foreign dialogue is really quite difficult to follow when you're also trying to paint at the same time. And that's particularly unfortunate at the moment when I'm enjoying painting Japanese miniatures in respect of the Japanese Flashing Blades game that we've been developing and designing at Lardies Island. But for that, I'd have been enjoying films by Akira Kurosawa and various other Japanese Chanbara style dramas. But unfortunately at the minute I've not been reacquainting myself with many of those, because it's just really quite difficult following English subtitles of Japanese dialogue. So reacquainting myself with those films will probably have to wait just a little bit longer. And the last point, I think, what do I drink while I'm sitting at the painting table? Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it, really? I think there's certain drinks that you can actually really enjoy while you're painting. Alcohol actually isn't really one of them. I don't tend to drink alcohol while I'm painting. I'll enjoy a good cup of tea, English breakfast or Earl Grey, and also green tea more recently. I've really enjoyed that as an alternative just to drinking normal English breakfast tea. But occasionally a cup of coffee, although often when I'm painting it's late in the evening, so I tend to go for the decaf there. There you go, an extra Sidney Roundwood irrelevant fact for Christmas Eve. But I can promise you, by the time that you're listening to this, I'll be enjoying a festive eggnog at Roundwood Towers. And all that's left is to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and an extremely happy and prosperous New Year.